Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about the fluid balance. We are specifically going to focus on two hormones, our vasopressin hormone and our aldosterone hormone, and we're going to see how those two hormones can affect and regulate our blood volume and our blood pressure. Our blood volume can affect our blood pressure. So if our blood volume is low, that can eventually cause your blood pressure to decrease. If your blood volume increases, that can eventually cause an increase to the blood pressure. Now, we actually have receptors that can pick up changes to our blood volume and blood pressure. We have stretch receptors or volume receptors in the atria chambers of our heart. And so those receptors are going to pick up any change to your blood volume. If your blood volume is high, those stretch receptors are going to pick up that. If the blood volume in your atria is low, again, those stretch receptors are going to pick up those signals. We also have baroreceptors. Baroreceptors are receptors that can pick up changes in our blood pressure. And we have baroreceptors on our aorta and on our carotid arteries. So if we look right here, let's say that someone's blood pressure or someone's blood volume is low. That decrease in the blood volume is going to cause a decrease in the blood pressure. The baroreceptors and the stretch receptors within your atria and your carotid and your aorta, they're going to pick up those changes. Once those receptors get triggered, your body is going to respond because your body would want to increase your blood volume and increase your blood pressure. So how is your body going to respond? Your body is actually going to increase, it's going to send a signal to your cardiovascular system, increasing your cardiac output, which is basically the amount of blood your heart is pumping in a minute. So your body would want to increase that cardiac output. And by increasing your cardiac output, by increasing how much blood you're pumping out of your heart, that's going to cause your blood pressure to increase. Your vessels are also going to go through vasoconstriction. They're actually going to constrict, and by constricting the blood vessels, you're going to increase the blood pressure as well. Your thirst sensation is also going to increase. So you're going to feel the urge that you need to drink water. And so by increasing your water intake, you're going to increase your blood volume because by drinking water, you're going to increase the fluid within your extra cellular fluid and your intracellular fluids. Those fluids are going to increase because now you're drinking more water, and by that you're going to increase your blood volume and therefore increase your blood pressure. Your kidneys are also going to respond. Your kidneys are going to retain the water. So you're going to urinate less because now you're going to be retaining the water. And so by retaining the water, you are going to increase your blood volume, and so therefore you're going to increase your blood pressure. Now, let's say that it's a different scenario. Let's say someone's blood volume is pretty high, and therefore their blood pressure is very high. One more time, the receptors are going to pick up those changes. The way your body is going to respond, your body is going to try to decrease your blood volume and decrease your blood pressure. And so therefore your cardiac output will decrease. You will actually be pumping less blood out of your heart. And so that's going to cause your blood pressure to decrease and your vessels are going to dilate. So vasodilation will take place, and all of that is going to cause your blood pressure to decrease. Your kidneys, instead of retaining water, your kidneys are actually going to release the water out of your body. And your kidneys are also going to release salts out of your body, of course, in your urine. There is a saying that says water follows salt. So by your kidneys excreting salt out of your body, water is going to follow, and it's also going to be released out of your body. By releasing all of that water out of your body, you're basically lowering your extracellular fluid volume and your intracellular fluid volume. And so therefore, since you're decreasing those fluid volume, you are going to eventually also decrease your blood pressure. In our brain, we have our hypothalamus and we have our pituitary gland. Our hypothalamus, as you can see, is connected to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland has two lobes, the anterior lobe of the pituitary and the posterior lobe of the pituitary. The hypothalamus produces a bunch of hormones. Some of these hormones will be released out of the hypothalamus, and those hormones, they get stored in the posterior lobe of the pituitary to eventually get released out. The one hormone that we are going to talk about today is vasopressin. You can either call it vasopressin, or you can call it arginine vasopressin, or antidiuretic hormone. Vasopressin is going to help us retain the water in our body. By retaining the water in your body, you're going to increase your blood volume and therefore increase your blood pressure. What triggers the release of vasopressin? Three things. Low blood pressure, low blood volume, or a pretty high osmolarity. Let's talk about osmolarity first. Osmolarity means the total amount of solute particles you have in your fluids, in your extracellular fluid or your intracellular fluid. Meaning that osmolarity is basically you're counting how many total sodium ions you have, total potassium ions, total chloride ions. So the total of these solute particles, we refer to it as osmolarity. Now, our osmolarity in our intracellular fluid and our extracellular fluid, normally it's about 280 milliosmoles or 300 milliosmoles. What's going to trigger vasopressin release is if your osmolarity level is way higher than 280. So the amount of solutes or the amount of particles like sodium ions, potassium ions, etc., if it's really high to the point that now your total is higher than 280, that's going to release the production of vasopressin. Because vasopressin is going to retain water, and by retaining water, you will actually dilute that high osmolarity that you have within your fluids. So you can think of it that by releasing vasopressin, you are diluting your extracellular fluid so that you can bring it back to normal levels. Low blood pressure is going to be sensed by your baroreceptors on your carotid and your aortic arteries. Low blood volume is going to be sensed by our stretch receptors within our atria chambers in our heart. All of these receptors, and actually your osmolarity is going to be sensed by our osmoreceptors. All of these receptors, once they are triggered, they are going to send a signal to your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is going to receive that signal, and it's going to start producing vasopressin. Vasopressin, once it's produced by your hypothalamus, it will be stored in your pituitary and eventually released out of your pituitary. Vasopressin, as I said, is going to help us retain the water. What is vasopressin going to target? It's going to target um, tubules within your kidney known as the collecting duct. Where is that collecting duct? If we look at this lateral view of the kidney right here, here is the renal cortex region. This inner part is the renal medulla. Right here, we have tubules known as the collecting duct, and this is what vasopressin is going to target. It's going to target the collecting duct. It's going to insert water pores on the surface of the collecting duct, and by inserting those water pores, the water is going to be retained. And we will zoom in and take a look at it in more detail. Within our kidneys, we have structural units known as nephrons. We have about 1 million nephron in each kidney. And the nephrons are going to be right here in this region internally inside of our kidney, known as the renal cortex and medulla regions. So if we go ahead and zoom in on the renal cortex and medulla where we have our nephrons and look at how a nephron looks like, this is how one nephron looks like. A nephron is made up of a glomerulus, a proximal convoluted tubule, a nephron loop, and a distal convoluted tubule. And connected to our nephrons, we have those tubes right here known as our collecting ducts. On top of the nephron loop, there are usually a bunch of capillaries known as vasa recta. This image right here is basically a zoomed in image on this part right here. So you can see the vasa recta, which is right here. You can see a part of the distal tubule, which is right there. And then here is the collecting duct. Now, the collecting duct is known to be impermeable to water, meaning that collecting duct does not allow any water to be released out of it. So whatever water is going to be in your collecting duct is eventually going to be lost in your urine. If we want to actually absorb water out of our collecting duct, we must produce the hormone known as vasopressin. And the reason why vasopressin is going to help us absorb the water out of our collecting duct, it's because vasopressin is going to create water pores. Those water pores, once they are inserted on the surface of our collecting duct, the water is going to be allowed to exit through those pores and start entering into our bloodstream. And that's how we can start absorbing the water out of our collecting duct. Once the water is in our bloodstream, our blood volume is going to increase and our blood pressure is going to increase as well. And since we are retaining the water or reabsorbing it back in our bloodstream, you will notice that the urine that's going to be voided by your body is going to be highly concentrated because you've absorbed most of the water out of your collecting duct. And you notice that when you are pretty dehydrated, you notice that you urinate less, and you notice that your urine is pretty dark in color. And that's because vasopressin is being released, retaining the water and pushing it out of your collecting duct and back into your bloodstream. Right here, it's an image of your collecting duct and your capillary known as your vasa recta. As we said, vasopressin is going to be released in your bloodstream when your blood volume is low, or your blood pressure is low, or if your osmolarity is high, meaning that you are pretty dehydrated. So once vasopressin is released, it's actually going to bind to certain receptors on the surface of your collecting duct. Once vasopressin attaches itself to the receptors on your collecting duct, a bunch of events are going to take place within your collecting duct. Let's take a look right here. Inside of your collecting duct, you have a bunch of vesicles, and those vesicles are the ones carrying the aquaporins. And so what's going to happen is that those vesicles are going to get close to the surface of your collecting duct, and they're actually going to release via the process known as exocytosis. They're going to release the aquaporins on the surface of your collecting duct. Once the aquaporins are inserted on the surface of your collecting duct, as you can see, whatever water is in your collecting duct, it's actually going to be pushed into your bloodstream. So whatever water, let me show you right here, whatever water we have inside of our collecting duct, it's actually going to be pushed out from our collecting duct, and it's going to be reabsorbed back into our bloodstream. Once that happens and all of that water starts entering into your bloodstream, our blood volume is going to increase and our blood pressure is going to increase as well. It turns out actually that we produce more vasopressin at night. So at night we produce more vasopressin, and that's why you notice that we urinate less overnight, because the more vasopressin you produce, as we said, the more water is going to be reabsorbed back into your bloodstream, and therefore you urinate less and your urine is going to be much more concentrated. This image right here shows that if you do not produce vasopressin, then no aquaporins are going to be inserted on the collecting duct surface, and therefore no water is going to be reabsorbed. And so therefore, whatever water is going to be in your collecting duct, it's actually going to be released in your urine. And you will notice that if this takes place, then your urine is going to be larger in volume, and it's going to be pretty diluted because you are not retaining any of the water. And that's because your collecting duct is known to be impermeable to water unless you produce vasopressin. On top of our kidney, we have a gland known as the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland looks something like this, and this part of our adrenal gland is known as our adrenal cortex. Our adrenal cortex produces a hormone known as aldosterone. Aldosterone, it's a steroid hormone, and aldosterone is going to target the collecting duct within your kidneys and also the distal convoluted tubule within our kidneys. When is aldosterone going to be released? Aldosterone is going to be released if your blood pressure is pretty low, or if your potassium ion levels in your fluids within your body is really high. Those two things right here can stimulate the production of aldosterone. Aldosterone is going to target, as I said, your collecting duct within your kidneys and also the distal convoluted tubule within your kidneys. Aldosterone is going to increase the reabsorption of sodium, and it's going to secrete potassium. meaning that it's going to take out the sodium ions out of your collecting duct and out of your distal convoluted tubule and send them back into your bloodstream. Potassium secretion, meaning that it's actually going to push potassium out of your bloodstream into your collecting duct so that we can uh, release all of that potassium in our urine. Now, when sodium is going to be reabsorbed back into our bloodstream, there is a saying that says water follows salt. So by reabsorbing sodium, eventually water is going to be reabsorbed, and therefore aldosterone is going to help us increase our blood volume and eventually increase our blood pressure. But how is that going to happen? So when sodium is going to be reabsorbed back into our bloodstream, that's going to increase the osmolarity within your blood. And so when the osmolarity levels increases, that's going to stimulate the release of vasopressin. And then when vasopressin is released, vasopressin is going to go ahead and absorb the water and retain the water. So as you can see, aldosterone is not retaining the water in a direct way, it's retaining the water in an indirect way. Aldosterone is absorbing sodium, and by absorbing sodium and eventually increasing your osmolarity, vasopressin is going to go ahead and get released to absorb the water. Now, this image right here shows what if your blood pressure is really high and your blood volume is really high. If your blood pressure is high and your blood volume is high, you wouldn't want to release aldosterone and you wouldn't want to release vasopressin because those two hormones are just going to increase your blood volume and increase your blood pressure even further. And so if your blood volume and pressure are high and you want to go ahead and decrease them, your body is going to sense that, of course, because as we said, we have baroreceptors and we have those stretch receptors, and a signal is going to be sent to cells within your heart, your myocardial cells within your heart, and they are going to produce what's known as natriuretic peptides. Natri actually means sodium, and uritic actually means water loss. So those natriuretic peptides are actually going to release sodium out of your body in your urine. And as we said, water follows salt. So the more sodium you release in your urine, the more water is going to follow, and the more water is going to be released out of your body. By releasing a lot of water out of your body, what you're going to do is decrease your blood volume and therefore decrease your blood pressure. The way natriuretic peptides work is it's going to actually inhibit your hypothalamus from producing vasopressin. It's also going to inhibit your adrenal cortex from producing aldosterone. And so if you don't produce vasopressin and you don't produce aldosterone, you are not going to be retaining water. And therefore, you are going to decrease your blood volume and decrease your blood pressure. Another way natriuretic peptides work is it's going to send signal to your brainstem, your medulla oblongata, and it's actually going to act on your sympathetic nervous system. It's going to try to decrease your sympathetic output. Your sympathetic is your nervous system that acts on and gets stimulated when you are stressed out. So if you want to decrease your blood pressure, you don't want to be in a tense mode, and so therefore it's going to decrease your sympathetic output so that you can relax, and therefore your blood pressure is going to decrease.